Morning everyone, my name is Chris Liebertrail and I'm one of the marketing managers here at MYOB, and this morning it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker as part of our ongoing webinar series for our newsletters. And yes, so before we get started, I would like to start this morning discussing a couple of important things for you. So the first important question I have for you is, what do these numbers have in common? You'll see some numbers on the screen at the moment. Now, they all describe our topic and our speaker today. Did you know that the average successful business needs to touch or visit each prospect around 4.4 times with a closing rate of about 17%? That means the average business closes one sale for every 26 visits or touches. That's a lot of no or I need to think about it responses, isn't it? Now you might be asking yourself, why do most businesses have to speak to so many prospects in order to make one sale? And the answer to that question is quite simple. This is the way they learn how to sell. If you asked, they can give you plenty of seemingly logical reasons why in their market, with their products and services, it has been this way. But does it? Do you know that most prospects want to have multiple meetings, touches, in order to satisfy a need that is pressing and important to them today? And of course not. They want to buy what they need and they want the solution now. What they need to determine is whether you understand the key source of pain and whether your solution can cure it right away. The longer it takes for you to answer those two questions, the less likely it is you will close the sale. Now, in order to become more successful, you need to find a way to deliver what your audience is looking for and accomplish that in the fewest number of touches. What is exactly we are going to cover today. Now, Rhonda Lynn has mentored, presented, or influenced more than 14,759 business owners and senior managers. She's the world's only small business authority on neuromarketing. Rhonda Lynn has distilled the secrets of business success that she learned working on some of the world's most successful brands and produced a simple step-by-step process that you can apply to your message and to your audience to close more sales and boost your bottom line. She can help you put strategies in place to grow your bottom line and ensure that your customers never think of going elsewhere. Some of you may already be familiar with her books, Financial Foreplay, hit number 4 on the bestsellers list in Borders, and her latest book, Sales Seduction, is a top 20 in North America. We will not be pausing for questions until the end of this webinar, so please feel free to type them in throughout, and we will correlate them and answer as many possible in about 40 minutes.
Thanks, Chris. It's Rhonda Lynn here. Welcome, everyone. In order to kick off the session today, I just want to start by asking you 3 important questions. Number 1, what if the language that you're using is the single biggest reason why you're not closing more sales right now? What if I could show you just one simple thing that you can tweak in your existing message that would make your message irresistible? And what if I could show you a way to trigger a decision, to get clients to say yes more often? And for those of you who are a little bit devious, because I know you're out there, I'm also going to show you how you can use this on your spouse, your work colleagues, and even your kids. You know, does that sound like a good way or a good use of your time today? Great. Let's talk about how you can become more effective at communicating your message and influencing others. Now, right now, there are pretty much 7 simple reasons why people aren't buying from you. Now, you're going to think that it has something to do with the price, the economy, competition, and a whole host of other reasons, but I'm about to show you that that's just not true. The 7 reasons have everything to do with you and your message, which means that you're 100% in control of making the changes that you need to make right now, today, to boost your results. Because right now, you know that you're already wasting a certain percentage of your time on prospects and meetings, don't you? Doing more of what you've always done isn't going to improve your results. My aim today is to give you some insight and some tips that will help to make every encounter that you do have much more impactful and effective. Now, I'm sure you've all come across these rare salespeople who sell phenomenally. These people sell like crazy, rain or shine, and they don't have any slow days, do they? And what's more, they make it easy. and they make it look easy. Do you know why? Because it is easy for them if you know how to do it properly. Now, listen closely. Selling will become easy for you too after I show you a few tiny adjustments in the way that you sell and market your product and service. You'll be able to easily close a much higher percentage of your prospects without the struggle and frustration and rejection that you used to experience. So, what are we going to cover? I want to show you how to stop giving your audience too much information that's not critical to their decision-making process. To do that, I'm going to give you a crash course on how the brain of your prospect receives and processes information in order to make decisions. That's where the 7 stimuli come in. And yes, they do correspond to the 7 reasons why people aren't buying from you right now. I want to teach you how to trigger decisions faster so that you can get to a yes quicker. Because the absolute worst answer that you can get is, I need to think about it. It means that the prospect is not going to decide and that you're going to have to invest a lot more time and money to get a decision down the track. That's not good. It means, and this is really important, that your message has accidentally triggered the wrong part of their brain. And the part of their brain that makes decisions is actually now asleep, distracted, or just shut down. I'm going to show you how to avoid doing that. And I'm also going to reveal some proven strategies that you can use to trigger the part of your customer's brain that does decide. So when you first heard the term sales seduction, what did you think? I think the natural conclusion that most of you will want to jump to is that my methodology must be about sex, right? Because everybody knows that sex sells. Now, strangely enough, influence and persuasion isn't about sex selling at all. It's actually about something much more powerful, and that thing is survival. You see, your brain is hardwired to keep you safe and alive. But before we get into that, I want to share a little story with you about a client of mine. Molly has a small gourmet deli and restaurant, and one day a new customer walked into her store, made a quick purchase, and then he left. She was so excited, even though she'd only met this guy once. She wanted to pursue him, and she decided that she's going to take the logical approach of finding out as much as she could about him, getting to know him, and eventually she'd pretty much convinced herself that she'd get to the point where he'd ask her out. Now, you have to understand that this is out of character for Molly because she was very shy. And she used to regale me with stories all the time of one of her employees, Stella, who was quite the opposite. She had bright red lipstick, figure-hugging dresses, and a very flirtatious personality. So I didn't see Molly for about 2 weeks, but when I dropped in, I found out that this guy had returned to the store and that Molly had managed to strike up a conversation. She knew quite a bit about him, his likes, his dislikes. He asked her advice about things, and she even knew that he was single. She thought, surely it's only a matter of time before the guy would ask her out. As we were chatting, Molly stared at the front door, and suddenly she just went dead quiet. I turned around to see this well-dressed gentleman step inside the store, carrying this huge bunch of flowers. I thought for a moment that Molly was going to pass out. He smiled at her, smiled at me, and then proceeded to walk straight past us to the back of the store where he gave the bunch of flowers to the vivacious Stella. Now, Molly laughs at this when I tell the story now, but at the time she wasn't laughing at all. She was crushed because the object of her affection had fallen so quickly and so completely for the subtle feminine wiles of Stella. It didn't make sense to Molly's rational mind. She thought she'd done all the right things to woo him. She'd asked him lots of questions, spent time getting to know his likes and dislikes, and she'd even become a trusted advisor, but none of it had actually worked. None of it had given the desired effect. What she wanted was to get asked out. He'd fallen for Stella. Now, it took a long time for her to understand that the art of persuasion and seduction has little to do with conscious thinking and rational thought processes. It's about primitive instincts that happen below the surface of our awareness. You and I become attracted to people and messages, and we feel compelled to act long before we've had the opportunity to think things through clearly. Fortunately or unfortunately, conscious thought actually takes place long after the thinking part of the actual decision has been made. So surprisingly, the dilemma that you face right now has a whole lot more in common with Molly and her story than you might think. You and I say yes to things every single day without actually thinking about them, don't we? Today I want to share with you why you say yes and what specifically compels you to decide and take action as opposed to needing to think about it. And in the process, you're going to unlock the secret to transforming your own message into one that your prospects are dying to say yes to as well. So medical science and some high-tech equipment called fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, retinal tracking, and EEGs have provided us with an objective and deep understanding of how the brain processes sensory information and makes decisions. Now we have a huge insight into the major sections of the brain and how each performs different functions. While each of these distinct parts of your brain is constantly communicating and influencing each other, each piece has a very specific role. And as you might suspect, only one of them is actually responsible for decision making. Neuroscientists have actually mapped and measured which areas of your brain light up when decisions are made. So if your prospect's saying, I need to think about it, basically what's happened is your message has triggered the neocortex, which is the thinking part of the brain up top. This part of the brain lights up when you're processing words, numbers, colors, looking for data. In a nutshell, this part of the brain thinks. And when it does, it's actually using up tons of energy. That prolongs the decision-making process. So you're thinking, this doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but it really is for the brain. Your brain's consuming 25% of your body's energy. Because of this, your brain is actually hardwired to power down and conserve wherever it can. And one of the ways that it does this is that your brain does not rely on the thinking part in order for you to make decisions. And this is really important. So if you want to drag out the process of getting people to decide, you definitely want to give lots of big words, lots of numbers, graphs, features and benefits, etc. Because your customer is going to do a whole lot of thinking, but I promise you, he or she is not going to decide. This middle part, the feeling part, a lot of experts make the mistake of thinking that decisions take place in this part of the brain. Now, emotions are important and they have an influence on the ultimate decision, but a decision will not get made if only this part of the brain is triggered. So we're going to talk about that a bit more later. So where do you decide? At the top of your spinal cord, there's this collection of neurons. They're commonly referred to as the the reptilian brain. And this is the part of the brain that lights up when you decide. In fact, it lights up before you even have conscious awareness in your new brain that you've even made a decision, because it actually sees things 500 milliseconds faster than the thinking part of your brain. So in order to keep prospects to decide and use the least amount of energy, we need to trigger a quick decision. So you've got to stimulate and appeal to the old brain. This part of your brain hasn't evolved or adapted radically in millions of years, and it's a survival-focused organism which processes, sensory input much more quickly than the other parts of the brain. And as such, it determines which decisions will be accepted and acted upon. Now, this part of the brain, the decision-making part, is actually 45,000 times older than language and writing, and it's driven primarily by visual and primitive cues. So neuroscience has proven with 100% certainty that this part of the brain struggles to process both words and numbers. So I want to teach you how to get your prospect to use the least amount of mental energy in processing your message, which means that they're going to make a decision quicker and they're more likely to decide in your favor. Now, it's important to remember that this older reptilian brain doesn't think. It can only decide and act. And it's always at work scanning the environment, looking for information that's of value to your survival. So what does that mean? Well, basically, this is a picture of your customer. Whenever you're thinking about who you're speaking to, I want you to have this in the back of your mind. Does Mr. Crocodile care about your brand? What do you think he thinks about photos of you or your business? How about your awards or certifications? Do you think they're important to him? Do you think he might be interested in your features and benefits? No. Mr. Crocodile just wants to eat and survive. You can probably see why now your existing sales and marketing materials, if you think about it, which are full of stuff about you, are basically not working. Let's take a look at the 7 stimuli, because these 7 stimuli, which appeal and trigger the decision-making part of the brain, are the only ones. If you craft your message in this way, you're going to make it easier for your customer to understand your core message. Let's take a look at the first one together. Now, if I were to come out and take a look at your website, your sales presentation, your last email, or even your brochure, what do you think I would find? Well, without fail, 60 to 70% is going to be about you. I guarantee it. And believe it or not, for those of you who have sales presentations, that number is probably even worse, maybe 80%. It's easier to talk about you and what you know, isn't it? So basically the tendency is to talk about your product and service, what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. And if you're using visuals, unfortunately, they're probably about you. And if you're like most small business owners, the rest of the time, you're just trying to cram as many words as you can to let people know just how much you can do. So basically what you've done is you've overwhelmed the new brain with information that's not critical or relevant to your audience's decision-making process. Now, you think it's important, but unfortunately they don't, right? Mr. Reptile doesn't. Now, this is the primary reason that most people aren't saying yes to your message right now, and I want you to just make note of this and write it down, because I want you to go back and take a look at your materials. You only have 60 seconds, probably less, to grasp the reptilian brain's attention. What you need to say up front has to be 100% focused and relevant to helping him or her solve his or her number one source of pain. If it isn't, what you're going to find is the reptilian brain's going to turn off, conserve energy, and stop listening to you. So your sale is effectively won or lost in that first 60 seconds or less. It's because of this innate self-centeredness that you need to focus 100% of your sales and marketing message on how your solution is going to cure the pain of your customers and keep him or her safe. You want to use the word you wherever you can. Don't say things like the client or we help people do this. You want to talk to them as if you were actually having a conversation, and using the word you helps. It's all about, the client asking themselves, what's in it for me? WIFM radio, what's in it for me? It's your job to answer that question in a way that he can quickly grasp it, decide, and take action. Now, your old brain is constantly scanning for contrast as well, because stark differences, big against small, hard against soft, dark against light, those things help to identify threats so that you can take action and the brain can keep you alive. Take for the example of a frog. Legend has it that if you drop a frog into a boiling pot of water on the stove, it jumps out to save itself immediately. That's the usefulness of the reptilian brain in action. But if you put that same frog in a pot of water at room temp and you boil it gently, it's basically going to sit in there because it can't tell. There's not enough contrast for it to decide. This is a perfect metaphor for how important contrast is to your brain, or the part of your brain that decides. If there's not enough contrast, or if there is enough contrast, your old brain's going to be motivated compelled to take action right now. You're not going to feel the need to make a list, evaluate pros and cons, and worry where you're going to find the money, will you? Your old brain is going to make a decision, and the thinking part of the brain may ask questions later. However, if there isn't enough contrast in the message that you see, even though the threat is real and imminent, you're not going to sense enough urgency to make a decision and jump before it's too late. You're going to just kick up the information to the thinking part of your brain, and you're going to create a spreadsheet, research the competition, and create up a whole bunch of objections. Meanwhile, you or your prospect could very well be losing money, losing sleep, losing competitive advantage, or worse, like this frog of ours, boiling to death. Your customer needs to feel the difference between your solution, your competitor's solution, and doing it themselves, or worse, doing nothing. To get more people to decide, you need to increase the amount of contrast in your message. Think about it. You can't sell a fire extinguisher by listing a whole bunch of features and benefits, can you? Or telling them this offer is strictly limited. You need to light a fire, and you need to do that right now. In order to react quickly and keep you safe, the old brain has to rely on instinct and automatic responses to all incoming signals. This kept you alive, historically. This means that your old brain is much more likely to absorb and react to a message that is easily understood. One that, say, a 6-year-old could understand. A more complicated message that has big numbers, big words, things that are unfamiliar, graphs, jargon, and clutter, causes the old brain to basically switch off. Switching off means that this person isn't going to decide, are they? And all of this delays the decision-making process. So if you had to share your last message or your presentation or your website with a 6-year-old right now, ask yourself, would he or she get it? Could you close the sale right now? Or would this person have to go away and do a whole lot of new brain thinking in order to get what you're trying to say? Try to use more photos or tell a story that helps your audience to grasp the benefit of choosing your solution. I mean, most of you have probably taken the easy way out. You're including anything and everything, hoping that something will work. In the end, somebody's going to do the hard work. If you don't do it up front, you're basically asking your customer to do it, and it means that you risk losing the sale. Your reptilian brain really likes things it's familiar with because it feels safe. Unfamiliar stuff represents a potential threat, so your old brain is going to automatically steer you away from that. So if you want to influence and persuade more people, you need to actually find a concrete way of conveying that you understand their pain and that you actually have experience helping people who are exactly like them. So here's some tips. If the product or service that you're selling is quite new, meaning customers are unfamiliar with either it or you have a strong competitor in your market, you're going to have to find a risk-free option so that your prospect or your customer can experience your solution right now without any risk. You could try aligning yourself with support from a source that they already trust, and you could possibly share a true story where you've experienced the same problem, or a client you help has had the same problem and you've solved it. I want you to spend a few moments today just looking at your materials. Do they make your leads feel safe, or do they really just give the impression that you only care about yourself and your product and your service and your history? Once your prospect feels safe, I guarantee that she will let her guard down, and it earns you the time and gives you much more time to explain your solution and ask for that sale. Now, your brain, it's very selective when it comes to retaining and recalling what it's heard. Since the old brain is primarily concerned with your physical survival, it basically operates at near maximum effectiveness or alertness at the beginning and the end of every single task or interaction. However, this attentiveness drops to as low as 20%. Yeah, that's right, 20%, which is practically asleep in the middle of all of these events and interactions. So you need to put almost all of your energy and emphasis on the very first and the very last things that your potential customers will see or read. You need to capture their attention and deliver these powerful points up front when your audience is most alert and responsive. If you start by introducing your brand, building your credibility, or providing a huge background summary, this strategy is going to put your customers to sleep, and you're basically going to have to deliver your most important claims when they are least likely to remember them because they're asleep. This is why messages that paint a very clear before and after picture are quite effective, because it shows your audience how your solution could change their life. In the absence of this closure, which is a clear before and after, basically your customer is going to be forced to send the data up to the new brain, where they're basically just going to take more time to think about it and not decide. Now, everyone has heard the adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words. But to be honest with you, 99.9% of the marketing and sales messages that I see are not as visual as they need to be to trigger decisions and sales. So all of you on this call, no doubt, most of you know or sense that this is important, right? But unfortunately, you're not doing it in your messages. I want to explain to you right now why this is so important, because I want you to be able to take action and improve the effectiveness of your message. So I want you to write down these facts. Neuroscience has proven that your decision-making center, your old brain, is primarily a visual beast. 90% of brain activity is associated with making sense of visual stimuli. 90%. The brain processes visual stimuli much more quickly than auditory stimuli. In fact, 40 times more quickly. And finally, it takes your new brain about 500 milliseconds to process the exact same visual data that your old brain processes in 1 to 2 milliseconds. So humans can't rely on the slow processing speed of the new brain. We can't. We are therefore hardwired to make decisions at the old brain level that are mostly based on visual input and instinctual responses. So this makes visual imagery the most important and most powerful trigger that you can harness to your advantage. Now, remember that all pictures are not created equal, are they? The visuals that you use have to mean something to the old brain of your prospect. They have to have that "what's in it for me" message. And they have to stimulate a specific emotional response. A well-crafted story or a good picture that sort of captures the essence of your customer's pain is going to have people sold long before they have a chance to think about it. So, unfortunately, 99% of the graphs and charts and visuals that you're using just have too much information or too many numbers to be effective at producing a decision. I want you to exercise caution when using graphics because they can easily have the undesired effect of causing your audience to need to think about it. Now, as a buying stimulus, this is number 7, emotion is incredibly powerful. But, there's no more effective way to tap into or unleash emotion than to tell your prospects a story. Throughout the ages, I want you to think about this. We've passed on our history and our wisdom to our children in the form of stories, haven't we? As a child, you likely came to expect a story from the people that you loved and looked up to. Your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, babysitters. Your brain felt comfortable and safe with both the stories and the storytellers. So that's why, even now as a fully grown adult, you are much more susceptible and more likely to let your guard down when you hear a really good story that relates to you. You are so used to hearing these stories from people, that you trusted in your childhood that you automatically let your guard down and you're much more likely to take in the message, even though it's a marketing message, at a much deeper level in your mind. Now, in that same way, a persuasive campaign or sales presentation will draw you in emotionally because it compels you to feel the pleasure or the relief of using something before you own it. That's why, it's so very important to ask yourself, what stories does your audience need to know right now about your product or service? What emotions, if any, are you triggering when they see and hear your materials? Or is it pretty much safe to say that you're just putting them to sleep with too many words or too much information? If your customers can't remember your message, how can you reasonably expect them to choose you? You can't. So at the beginning of my presentation, I asked you a series of 3 important questions, and you now have the answers to those. Number 1, you now know that to influence and persuade the part of the brain that decides, you need to speak the language of the reptilian brain. Knowing these 7 stimuli means that you can know which part of the brain processes information in order to make decisions. You can stop delivering information that's not critical to the decision-making process. And you now know why selling features and benefits doesn't work, because it triggers the wrong part of the brain. You also have some great tips and strategies that you can use to make your message irresistible. In particular, you're going to go back to your office right now and take out everything that is about you and focus your entire message on what is important and relevant to your prospect, aren't you? You know that using too many words and, you need to introduce more visuals and stories to engage and connect with your audience and their pain. And as you also now know, to reduce the amount of time it takes for your audience to decide, you've got to appeal to this reptilian brain. Decisions are made hastily and they're made automatically by the old brain, and they're dominated by visual cues. So if your customer needs to think about it, you basically know that you've inadvertently triggered the wrong part of the brain. You now can go back, can't you? And you can simplify your message and show him or her up front how their life is going to be better with your solution. Now, if you like some of the stories that I've shared with you, please consider having a look at Sales Seduction. I've probably covered maybe less than 10% of what I've covered in the book. In the book, what I've done, which I think is really important, is I've shared with you in great detail the research that I relied upon. What type of research was conducted so that you can go back and have a look and assess it for yourself. I've also provided with every single point and in every chapter a very specific client story of how somebody that I've worked with personally in my business has actually used this principle to turn their message around into one that was much more effective, and I've given you some stats as to how that actually affected their sales and conversion rates. When you do buy the book from our website, just so that you know, I always provide 6 months of video highlights coaching, and I always provide free shipping and a money-back guarantee, because I want to make it risk-free for you to get help and to transform your message. I want to make this as easy as possible, because I know that if you are spending $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 on your marketing and it's not effective, you need to stop right now before you spend any more or waste any more money. Recraft your message so that it has better impact and greater effectiveness with the eyeballs and the people who are actually seeing it. So we're come now to the question time. I hope that we've got lots of questions banked up, and Chris has probably been tabulating them wildly in the background. If you haven't asked any questions and you have them, please feel free to start typing them now, as we're going to take as many as we can in the time frame that we're still sharing together.
Thank you very much for that, Rondalyn, and thank you for your insight and information today. I've certainly gained a whole new respect for neuroscience, and I'll be honest, I think I'm a little afraid of my alligator brain. So, without further ado, I'll start with the first question we've had come through here from Pania, and that is, can you please give us an example of a contrast in a message, Rondalyn?
So I guess it depends on what you do, but take for example, you may have a situation where you're selling, let's just say, pizzas. And so everybody out there in the market is selling pizzas, and everyone's selling them based on price, because that's actually, you know, probably the biggest factor that you see people, the Domino's, the Pizza Huts, and those doing. One of the things that Domino's did that was actually really clever is they went back in, I think it was the 70s, and they started talking to their customers and finding out what pain was really troubling them. And the number one thing that came up through all of their research wasn't about the toppings, wasn't about the price, which everybody else was focusing on. The number one question that customers had was, when in the world is my pizza going to get here? So what they did was they went back, and in contrast to everybody else in the industry who was focusing on things like toppings, shape, and price, Domino's ran one of the most successful campaigns in fast food history by basically saying this: if your pizza doesn't get there in 30 minutes, it's free. And so that's an example of contrast, doing something that is clearly different from everybody else in your industry, because you all can't be the cheapest, can you? And you all can't be, you know, the fastest. You've got to create more contrast in your message and teach people that doing nothing, there's a cost to that. Picking your solution is, you know, the antidote to that.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, our next question has come through from Richard, and he's asked, I have brought many people to the line, but I just can't get them over the line. How do you think he can improve that without, I suppose, a little bit more context there, Richard, but what's your thoughts on that, Rondalyn?
Look, I'm probably guessing, Richard, that you're in sales, just by the language of the question, so let me, you know, hopefully I'm correct in that assumption and I can make some comments. Bringing people close to the line, but not getting them to say yes, says to me a number of things. Number one, the three things that you really need to do in your presentation or your website are this. You need to recreate your customer's pain. You know, what's troubling them. You need to solve that pain, and you need to prove that you can solve it. So if a person doesn't decide, you've probably failed to do one or more of those three things. The other thing is, in terms of decision, is contrast, just like the question before. If there's enough contrast in what's going to be the cost of them doing nothing and not making a decision today versus choosing you, if that contrast is great enough, people will decide. So it could just be as simple as not having enough contrast in your message.
Fantastic. Now the second question, or sorry, the third question we have is from Lisa, and she's asking, being in the catering business, how does one get the client to positively respond? Great question.
Well, I think that I'm guessing that you're talking in the context, again, because we don't have heaps of information. I'm guessing that you're talking about, you know, going out and getting people to buy your services or engage you to do the catering, the biggest thing that you can do, rather than trying to sell features and benefits and tell people about the price and what's happening with your catering services versus everyone else, or here's our quote, is really grabbing people's attention up front. If you know that something is really important to a particular client in the catering business, and you go in and you solve that problem in your initial upfront dealings with them, beyond a shadow of doubt, you're going to get decisions and you're going to get in front of them. I've seen clients do all sorts of crazy things. I talk about this in the book. One of my clients, he's not a caterer, he was actually in pharmaceutical sales, could not get a meeting with someone. And he was really struggling because this person just never had time. She was a pharmacist, she was running her own pharmacy, and she would never make time for him to come and see her. But he knew intuitively that she was struggling and that she was losing sleep because there was lots of competition with other chemists in the area, and she was under extreme pressure from her head office, because she was a franchisee, to reduce her or to increase her gross profit margins. So she was, not a business person by trade. She was a chemist, and she was under a lot of pressure. So he needed to get in front of her, and he literally got a pillow in a box and taped his message to the pillow, sent it to her, and basically said, you're going to sleep better tonight knowing that I've solved this problem. And, he put the details of what he was going to do for her in the pillow. He got a call from this woman within 15 minutes of receiving it, and she booked an appointment to see him. And previously, he couldn't get into her. So it's about thinking, what's important to this person in your catering business is trying to talk to. How can you show this person that you understand and can solve it, so that you're more likely to get in the door and get in front of them, so that you can, start to get your decision quicker.
Great, thank you very much. Now, our next question is from Samantha, and she said, I'm in the psychological service industry. How do you show your service is invaluable above others in this 60-second time frame? Now, I'm assuming, Samantha, that you're referring to the time you have to make your pitch to your client or prospect.
Well, again, I think one of the biggest things that you probably got this from what I talked about is this concept of storytelling. I helped quite a few clients that were in your line of work, in particular also the healing medicines. So people who are physiotherapists, people who do IVF, Chinese medicine, all of these kind of alternative therapies, they help people to solve physical and mental problems. Hypnotherapists. One of the things that I've noticed is that sharing these client stories is probably the most powerful, because if somebody comes to you and they're in extreme pain, perhaps they have depression or maybe an eating disorder, that's real pain. People come to you, they're in pain. If you are sharing with them in either your sales scripts or in your webinars that you've helped clients who are exactly like them, you've basically sold them right then and there, because as long as that they can see the photo of the person and the name of the person, the last thing I want to see on your website is like Bob from Melbourne. If you're going to do client testimonials, the ideal thing would be to have a video or a picture so that the person can see them and ascertain that they're real and not a fabrication, and the real name of the person. And again, these testimonials have to be really specific. They can't just be, I loved Samantha and she was great. They have to say, I came to Samantha with this problem. I was really struggling with depression and anxiety. I tried medication. It didn't work. And within 3 sessions, I achieved these results. That's going to really supercharge your message, Samantha.
Fantastic. Thank you. Our next question has come through from Natalie, and she said, I sell handmade jewellery online. What would my client's pain be, and how can I get them to choose my products? I have mainly visuals, and a lot of my customers view my site, but I'm not converting these to sales. How do you think you can help with that, Rhonda?
Okay, so here is a really good tip for everybody. Stop guessing. The worst disservice that you can do to your business right now is to guess what your customer's pain is, because most of you, that's what you've been doing. I talked to a couple of attendees for this particular seminar yesterday in the lead up to it. A couple of people applied for strategy sessions, and I spoke to them. And almost every last one of them was doing the same thing that you're probably doing, Natalie, is guessing or assuming what the customer's pain is. here's my advice to you. And I talk about this a little bit in Chapter 7 of the book. It's about doing your homework. It's about sitting down and saying, I need to talk to my best customers because I want more of those best customers. And when talking to them, I need to figure out what's important to them. What's keeping them up at night? What's the number one thing that is a problem or challenge with them in choosing the product or service that I provide? And asking those questions and then being very quiet and letting the customer tell you why. And when they start to tell you why, you follow up by saying, why is that important to you? Because we need to talk to our customers to find out what these pains are. The very worst thing that you can do is guess. So please stop guessing and please take the time out to actually start talking to people and structuring questions that can get you to that pain. Because once you understand the pain, all you have to do is provide the number one cure to that pain. So stop doing what everybody else is doing in your industry and just cure that pain.
Fantastic. Now, our next questions come through from John, and his I suppose point is he sees that a lot of the information you're providing is great for low dollar transactions, sub $250 transactions, but his question is around larger sales, in the millions of dollars, where he feels that negotiations can take 6 months or more, and these decisions generally tend to be a lot more analytical and forensic, and obviously need a lot more information and insight. How do you see some of these practices applying to that situation, Audrey?
Well, strangely enough, John, this is a great question because neuroscience is quite expensive. So the average small business owner doesn't really have a lot of cash to go out and hire a consulting agency with fMRI technology to start mapping the brains of their customers. I think that someone said that the Age newspaper, when they switched formats here in Australia, spent several $100,000 trying to figure out whether the new format for the new proposed smaller layout, the one-page layout, the broadsheet, was going to be more effective and better read by their readers than the huge piece of paper that they used to produce. Now, neuroscience in its essence has actually been tested and worked on by all these bigger companies. The brands that you'd be familiar with, some of them are the McDonald's and the KFCs of the world that are selling low-ticket items, but some of them are actually big organizations like NASA and companies that sell to government organizations and space technologies. So they're talking about huge dollar sales, sales to government, or sales to companies where the sales lead cycle time might be a year, and you're talking big ticket items. All of this stuff was actually tested on these big companies, and that's where a lot of the insight came from. So this stuff is directly applicable. And think about it. If you can apply simple techniques like this, so it might be something as simple as when you go out to do your initial meeting with whoever you need to talk to in the sales cycle, rather than boring them up front with a huge because this is the tendency. You'll go out and talk about yourself. We've been in business for 15 years, and this is what we are doing, and this is how we're doing it and why we're doing it. I see people doing this all the time because they want to establish credibility, because this is a huge sale, and they think that they need to waste this valuable time up front talking to people. One of the things you could go out and do is, if you're able to, is put your product or service into the hands of the people that you're trying to sell it to. I heard a story once that I believe came from the Corningware Corporation. And a long time ago, I think it was in the 60s or the 70s, the Corningware Corporation, this is before neuroscience, but they made this thing called Gorilla Glass. And so they had these pie plates that went into the oven and heated up, and they used these Gorilla Glass covers, which were unbreakable, to cover up the food inside, and they had a hard time getting people to believe in the industry that the glass could go inside the oven and that it wouldn't shatter. So the most successful salesperson that they had, instead of going out and talking about all the technology that they'd done, all the science that was behind the designing of this, because this could go on for 30, 40 minutes, telling somebody about science and technology that was used to develop the product. This guy went out, basically asked people if they'd be willing to do an experiment. He handed out safety goggles, handed out a piece of glass, and handed a mallet to each person in the sales presentation. and invited them to start bashing the living daylights out of this glass. And of course, once they realized that they could hit it, they could smash it, they could drop it, they could do whatever they wanted to it, that the glass wasn't going to break, he basically just got his, pad out and started taking orders. And so it's about figuring out what can you do using this knowledge to actually shorten the sales cycle by telling more stories, by actually putting the product or service into the person's hands so they can experience it, rather than focusing on all the techie stuff and all the science that's come about into developing. I mean, neuroscience is not an easy area. If you were to go out right now and buy some of the textbooks that have been written about this, you'd be hard-pressed to read them because they're so full of jargon and medical terminology that they're unreadable. What I wanted to do was the opposite of that. I wanted to take the science and boil it down so that a small business owner like yourself could actually get the value and start to use it in your own business without having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to acquire this knowledge.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we've probably only got chance for two more questions. So I'll put one forward from Andrea, and she's asking a good question, which is, I suppose, taking a different view on some of the tips you've provided, Rhonda. And she's asking, how do you deal with your own perception of the client in overcoming any negative prejudices which may become an obstacle to selling them to them in the first place? So trying to, I suppose, turn it around, saying what's her view of that client and how that impacts the sale.
Well, look, I think that whenever you go into a sale with a very predisposed idea of what someone's going to be like, it's probably always fraught with danger unless you've done your homework up front and you have a really good, solid understanding of what to expect. I mean, I hear clients tell me all the time, oh, but my customer is different, and my customer is, hard to deal with, and my customer is, this or that. Having these preconceived notions is not going to do you any services or favors in terms of closing the sale. Your number one focus when you go into that, help that person, is that, you've got a solution to that person's number one source of pain. I mean, a lot of people are afraid of selling. They think, I don't want to sell because I might be troubling people. I'm asking them to spend money they don't have. At the end of the day, the people that you go out to meet in whatever business you're in, they're in some sort of pain. If you're in the psychological service business like Samantha was, or you're in the catering business, they have a source of pain. That's why they need your product or service. And if you go in there and provide the number one solution that actually alleviates that pain right now, that's a good thing. That's something that to be proud of, not something to be ashamed of. Sales has gotten a bad name over the years because, in part, I think, by all these courses that are out there saying that you need to trick people into deciding. You need to use hypnotic words to get people to decide. You need to use this matching and mirroring and everything in order to get in sync with people to get them to decide. I think a lot of that stuff is actually old, outdated technology and ideas that people had that's not going to work, and it's given selling a bad name. You're there to solve people's pain. And if you go in, even if the person is hostile, if you can show them that you can solve their pain and you can prove to them very, very quickly in that, initial upfront piece that you can do that, I guarantee you'll get the sale. So it's about turning it around.
Great. All right, one more question, and then we'll follow that up with one little last one at the end there. So this one's come through from a gentleman named Simon, and he's asked, what's the best question you think you can ask a prospect?
So how I do it normally is I tend to like to do my research up front before I go in to see the client. And so oftentimes what I will do is do a quick call or speak to somebody briefly, preferably face-to-face or by telephone if possible, not by email, because email to me is a very impersonal technology. So the types of things that I would be asking, or the most important question would be something like, in the context of buying X product, so it could be catering, could be jewelry, could be psychological services, what's the number one thing that you find as a challenge or that holds you back in making a decision? Or if this person has already been your customer and you just want to get insights from the person because they bought for you, is you can say, compared to all of the other competitors that are out there right now, what was the number one reason why you chose us? And then be very quiet. And when they tell you what that is, follow up with follow-ups like, why is that important to you? Because you want them to dig deeper and to tell you specifically why they chose you. So my questions would be slightly different for people if they're not your customer yet, they're a prospect. But if they were your customer, I'd be asking them customer specific questions like why they chose you, or if you could give us, one piece of feedback to improve our business, what would it be? And then be quiet and listen to what they say. Resist the urge to talk too much and not listen to what they're saying. Your job is to ask the questions and then listen to the responses, not interject and try to guide them in a specific direction.
Great. All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. One last question, which I'll pose to Rhonda, which is a nice, quick one to answer, which has come from John. Does your book come in a Kindle version?
Yeah, it does actually. Yes, it does.
Fantastic.
That's a good question. But yeah, and for those of you that prefer just plain old PDF, not tied to a Kindle, we've got that on the website and stuff as well. So that's not tied to a specific device.
Great. All right. Well, once again, thank you very much for your time, Rhonda. It's been very valuable, I think, for a lot of the listeners, and I think everyone's definitely enjoyed it based on all the questions and feedback we've had come through. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for everyone who attended, and be sure to stay tuned for future editions of these webinars and our newsletters. And we have recorded this webinar, and we will be distributing that after it's uploaded to the internet. And we'll share that link. So once again, thank you to everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.